Here is an EOA Live LeGrand story.
Last week, we interviewed congressional candidate Cliff Bentz and Representative Greg Barretto. This week, our first special guest is Jimmy Crumpacker, a Republican candidate for United States Congress.
So I'm Jimmy Crumpacker. I'm running for Greg Walden's seat in the 2nd Congressional District here in Oregon. I live in Tumalo, Oregon, which is in central Oregon, on the outskirts of Bend, in between Bend and Sisters and Redmond in Deschutes County. I'm running for political office because I really believe that Oregon needs a strong conservative voice, especially in the 2nd District. 6 of our representatives back in Washington are already very left-leaning, and it's important to have a conservative voice. I'm not a politician, never run for political office before. I did go to Georgetown University where I studied government and had the great privilege of interning for Senator Gordon Smith. That was about 20 years ago. And that gave me a real taste for politics. And a very smart woman told me, don't go straight into politics, because that's what I thought I wanted to do with my career. She said, you need to become a business person first and then come back into politics. And so I went and worked on Wall Street for the last 18 years. And when this opportunity showed itself, I decided to run. I lived in New York City for 10 years, right after Georgetown, moved back home 8 years ago, opened my own business and have had a great run. And I closed my business at the end of last year to make this run for office. So we're very excited. We've been touring the entire district. We've already put 10,000 miles on the car. So we have been trying to see as many people as possible, because I don't have as much name ID as the other candidates, because I've never run for political office. So my business, I was a commodities trader. I focused on energy. That was my specialty. So I was greatly affected by 9/11. I watched the Pentagon burn from my apartment at Georgetown, and then I lived right next to a major bridge. And so we had Humvees and the Army came out, and they were right in front of my apartment, and that deeply affected me. And because I studied government at Georgetown, I understood the implications of our oil policy and the fact that we were importing about 7 million barrels of oil a day, a lot of that coming from the Middle East. And so we had to have a presence over there. I'm very proud to say that when I started in this business, the U.S. produced 5 million barrels of oil a day, and now we're up over 12.5 million barrels a day, and we are now energy independent as of September. So that can greatly change our foreign policy. And the lessons I've learned in business is that I think can apply to government. A lot of it has to do with my foreign policy experience. That really helps. Oil at the end of the day is really a foreign policy business. And also, understanding the needs of a business owner is really crucial in politics. Politicians don't necessarily know the ins and outs of business. And I think having a business background before you go into politics is really critical. So oil independence will allow the U.S. to drastically change its foreign policy over the next 20 years. We no longer need to be in the Middle East. We had to be there. We had to have our armed forces there to protect the oil production out of those countries, because oil really is the lifeblood of our economy. We're consuming between 17 and 20 million barrels of oil every day in the United States. And so if a third of our oil was cut off because of a war, or what happened in the 70s where there was an oil embargo, that would greatly affect our economy. Now, because we are no longer dependent on foreign oil sources outside of Canada and Mexico, that will allow us to pull back from the Middle East, and it'll force countries such as China that now gets 7 million barrels a day of imports from the Middle East to have to step up to the plate and really take responsibility for that region. I think we've spilt enough blood and treasure over the last 30 years, and the real difference on the geopolitical front hasn't changed. And so that's something that will really help our foreign policy moving forward and allow us to focus on number one, and number one being the United States of America. Spending money here on roads and bridges and schools is much more critical, I think, than being over there and trying to be the police officer for the Middle East. It's going to be hard for us to move away from oil until there's something else that we can replace it with. In Oregon, we're very fortunate to have incredible hydropower. It's over 50% of our electrical capacity comes from hydropower, which I believe is renewable, even if some people don't believe that that is a renewable resource. And to me, as long as you're not subsidizing the energy sector, that's a major issue for me. You're seeing a lot of subsidies go to wind farms and other things like that are then competing with hydropower, and that to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Government dollars shouldn't be spent to prop up an industry because government's not very good at picking winners at the end of the day. And the oil, it's still the best thing that runs energy because it's very easy to move, it's very easy to produce. Most other forms of energy are hard to move around. In oil, you lose very little of it when you move it from point A to point B. And so until we come up with something else that can replace it, I don't think oil is going to be going anywhere anytime soon. But at this point, it's a huge advantage for the United States being energy independent. If oil prices surge and go way up, it won't affect our economy like it used to because we're producing so much of it in the United States. Whereas it would greatly affect a country like China if the oil price doubled. All of a sudden, their oil bill would go dramatically higher. No, the cap and trade issue that's going on in Oregon doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The United States is already at 67-year lows of energy usage per person. So we are leading the world in forging a future that is not only being more energy efficient, but having a more sustainable future. And Oregon is one of the top 2 or 3 states in the country that is the cleanest. And so you're talking about the country that is doing incredibly well as far as being energy efficient, and the state that is leading this country. And so to put a cap and trade bill in doesn't make any sense because at the end of the day, all it really is doing is taxing individuals and people who can't afford more taxes. I mean, it is taxing the least well off because it's just taking a percentage, and that makes no sense to me. Farming is a critical component of the economy in Eastern Oregon, and it's something that is critical to our state as well. And I would go back and fight for free trade agreements. At the end of the day, a lot of our farm products are moving out of state. I've heard from certain farmers 80-90% of their products are not only moving out of state but out of country, right? And so if you can go and you can open up some of the biggest markets in the world, say the Japanese market, to our cherries, that is going to be a huge win for the 2nd District. And so opening up free trade agreements with not only the Japanese but the Chileans, countries around the Pacific Ocean, I think is a huge win. We have a huge advantage that our farm products are not that far from the Pacific Ocean, which is a huge advantage over a lot of other states. And so that is something that I would go back and fight for. And then we also have to protect our dams. It's something that I think is critical not only for irrigation but also electricity, especially in this part of the state. And on the federal level, that is something I would fight for. I am a 7th generation Oregonian, so this state is what I love more than anything in the world. And when my family originally came out here in the late 1840s, and they settled down in near Medford in Jacksonville. From a very early age, it was drilled into me that Oregon is the best place in the world, and I have grown to appreciate that. I left for 20 years, and when I came back, I understood just how special this state is, and it's something that we need to fight for our way of life. It's certainly a concern what you're seeing not only in Salem, but with the 6 other left-leaning representatives back in Washington are trying to erode our way of life, and that is something that I really want to fight for. I don't have the option of moving to Idaho. When you're 7th generation Oregonian, you have such deep roots that you don't have any other option but to stay here and fight for our conservative values. So that is something that is really critical to me. I'm Jimmy Crumpacker. I'm running for Greg Walden's seat in the 2nd Congressional District. I'm not a politician. I've never run for office, but what I do believe in is fighting for Second Amendment rights. I am pro-life, and I am a strong supporter of President Trump. And if you want to find out information on my campaign, you can go to crumpackerforcongress.com. It is a very strange spelling, but that is Crumpacker, crumpackerforcongress.com. I appreciate your time. So one of my biggest topics that I'm talking about when I'm traveling around the district is the fact that the federal government and their federally owned land has been shut off to Oregon and our economy. You know, they have 53% of the state, which is nearly 32 million acres. And when I was a kid, that acreage was used, and we had 85,000 timber workers. Now we're down to 25,000 timber workers. That went from 8% of the GDP of the state, and now it's under 1% of the GDP of our state. And what you've seen after 25 years of not managing this land, you're seeing massive forest fires. We're losing between 500 and 800,000 acres to forest fire every year, and that's simply because we're not managing these lands. So I need to go back, tell the story, because what people don't understand, especially east of the Mississippi, is how much of Oregon we don't control ourselves. In Deschutes County, only 20% of our county is privately owned. That's incredible. So that means that 80% of the land is basically not allowed to be used or taxed by the local government. And this has a dramatic impact not only on blue-collar jobs, but on schools. And what you're seeing, especially in rural Oregon, is that idle hands are the devil's work. And you're seeing a lot of opioid and meth use that is skyrocketing. That is a major issue. So that's something that I want to go back to Washington and fight for, to tell the story about. And this is something that we need to do. We need to start managing our land like we were allowed to from the 1850s until the 1990s, when the Clinton administration said that we could no longer manage our own land. On the federal judges piece, this is something that is critical. You have to understand that President Trump has appointed 192 judges to the federal bench. This is something that will have a dramatic impact, because the president won't be in the White House forever. You know, hopefully another 5 years, but at that point, we don't know what's going to happen, and laws can always be overchanged. What cannot be overturned is a lifetime appointment to the federal bench. And of the 192 appointments that the president has made to the federal bench, the average age is actually 10 years younger than the Obama appointments. So what that means is that they will be around for a lot longer. And at the end of this year, there will be a quarter of the federal bench will actually have been appointed by President Trump. These are record-setting numbers for any president. And this will have a dramatic impact on protecting a conservative way of life, protecting the Second Amendment. It'll have a dramatic impact on pro-life and, you know, our conservative way of life. And it's something that is really important for people to understand the actual impact on the ground that it will have. And it'll dramatically affect sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, because it's the courts that are protecting these cities from being cut off from federal funding. And so if the courts are changed and we have another 4 years of President Trump, we could have up to 50% of the federal bench could be Trump appointees. And that is something that is a long-lasting, dramatic change, and something that cannot be overturned in the future. So that's something that is important that I think voters should really understand. I don't know if it's uncommon knowledge, but you know, the Trump administration has appointed 2 Supreme Court justices, which is critical. And what we're going to see over the next 4 years, if he's reelected, we will definitely see, in my opinion, at least 1, if not 2 more liberal judges coming off the Supreme Court. And President Trump will have the opportunity to replace those liberal judges with conservative judges. And that is something that will have dramatic consequences across the United States in protecting our conservative way of life. I think it's important that Trump is appointing judges to the federal bench that are strong constitutionalists. That is something that is critical. You know, you have to understand that the Constitution was written for a reason, and we need to follow it. And, you know, that is something that I'm proud to talk about. And I'm proud to be a conservative. And that is something that is critical and will have lasting impact on Eastern Oregon.